2 years later, after the anarchy of the July 2021, where the country is actually still in the dark regarding the planned widespread violence and looting and the perpetrators of the anarchy, despite the arrests that have been made. Findings of the expert panel report into the civil unrest, which probed the July 2021 riots, established that the country's law enforcement failed to protect life and property during the widespread violence and civil unrest that engulfed parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. The unprecedented events took more than 350 lives and cost the country an estimated 50 billion rand in economic damage. Violence monitor Mary de Haas joins us on the line to talk a little bit more about this. Mary, thanks very much for joining us. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning, everybody.
So, Mary, 2 years later, what do we actually know about the unrest that took place in July 2021?
Look, we know who some of the instigators were because they were quite upfront about it on social media. We know who the people who should have been charged with sedition were because they were at the Zuma homestead and threatened to shoot the police, and none of them have been charged. Some of the many known instigators have been charged. The cases are in courts. They're still in court. There was a remand. They're being charged for incitement, and there was some talk that they might be charged with terrorism, but I'm not sure what the final charges are because they're on remand, they're on bail at the moment. There have been a few of the looters sentenced, the minor players. One of them was very prominent. He's just had a suspended sentence, the guy that went into Woolworths and helped himself to food. But, there's a whole lot of stuff that's never been, I think, for example, out in one of the areas which was ravaged, the areas around KwaZulu-Natal and Phoenix, there was dental equipment went missing. Now, how difficult is it to trace dental equipment that gets looted? I mean, you can understand if they, that's just so conspicuous. So there's no sign of that sort of looting, the products of the looting having even been found. So, perhaps most seriously of all, in Phoenix, which is a historically Indian area, right in the middle, because this is an apartheid city where the different non-white races were clustered together, usually near business centres, and 36 people, black African people, were killed in Phoenix.
Yeah.
I think they were on their way to loot the business park. It wasn't residents. And no one has been, the murder charges have been withdrawn. It was known that the police didn't do anything about it, that security companies were involved. And according to FERA, they fined some security companies. Now, this is very bad for race relations, what happened in Phoenix. And there was a report 10 years ago after an organization called Mazibuyi Forum came up and actually with some fairly good evidence said, look, there's still discrimination against black Africans because Indian people of Indian origin are getting better education, more tenders, etc., etc. And there was a social cohesion report acknowledging the fact that steps had to be taken to actually improve relations, and none of those steps have been taken. I think the Africa report also mentioned the social cohesion, and the Mazibuyi Forum is still pushing this with government and saying, why aren't you doing anything? So these are things that happened with very serious consequences for structure, for economics, and for lives.
Yeah. Mary, your take on the matter from how the response by law enforcement agencies reacted and arrests that have been made to date as well, and whether there actually has been accountability, because I think that's what people want to see, is that obviously we saw people storming into shops and looting and the violence and everything that happened by people on the ground, but this was instigated from behind closed doors. This didn't just happen. I mean, the high-level arrests, the people that are being held accountable, the reaction from law enforcement. Perhaps you want to talk to us about that.
Yes, indeed. Look, we don't know who orchestrated it. The Africa report, the high-level report, refers to faceless people using what appears to have been very sophisticated technology. So we don't know who they were. We don't know why they did it. But it was very well orchestrated because the same sort of things were happening in different parts of the province at the same time within the space of a couple of days. You could see the modus operandi was the same. It had been very carefully orchestrated. And we don't know who and we don't know why. Now, at the same time, there was definitely no proper response from the police. Look, first of all, I think, and the Africa report blames the country's executive for allowing it to happen. And that starts basically with the Minister of Police, because the Minister of Police should have immediately asked the President to deploy the army to keep the roads, to unblock the roads, because one of the effects of this, which went on after it was it had died down, was that the roads were blocked, the food wasn't coming through. People in rural areas were battling because their businesses that they used to get the poorest people. I think I want to stress here that, yes, there have been huge insurance claims. The people that suffered most at the time were the poor people, because it was quite interesting. I mean, in a diabolical way, that the big businesses that they get their bulk supplies from had been burned. So they suffered. And as I said, I think it was a political strategy not to deploy the army immediately, but the minister must take response. Secondly, the police, the intelligence was lacking. We know that. It's been, there's been public hearings about it. Crime intelligence, state security didn't do their jobs properly because they were the ones that should have picked it up. And then, of course, to make matters worse, the police didn't. I know at one station in Durban, and this may have happened, probably happened elsewhere, several dozen police refused to lift a finger because they were supporters of Zuma. Now, what this is all saying is that the police have been factionized, politicized, and they also lack the capacity, because the Africa report found that public order policing numbers were way too low, and there was no equipment. One water cannon per province. Equipment not maintained, no air wing. Now, 2 years later, nothing has changed.
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
And that's the real reason is that we try and ask what has been learnt and what has changed. And there's been a lot of people saying that if an eventuality of this had to happen again, are we protected against it? Just quickly, Mary, sorry, we really don't have time, unfortunately. The panel was required to assess what relevant information was available, including the spheres and, also some of the structures of government and their roles, the management of information, who acted or should have acted on such information. What is your view on this?
Look, they should have. The panel found the executive, and those are the ministers responsible. But please, there's one thing that's really important, that 2 years before this happened, there had been a very comprehensive report, post-Marikana, about how to equip public order policing, establish a police board, demilitarize the police. None of those, to date, none of those recommendations have been implemented. Crucially, 4 years ago, there was a report chaired by Professor Mufamadi saying, take urgent action against state security. It's been compromised politically. It's unconstitutional. Pass the legislation to restore civilian control. That was 2 years before July 21. 4.5 years now later, that legislation still not passed. Parliament is blaming the presidency. We don't know where it is. But the whole point about this is nothing has changed. We're wide open to more problems with protest, but please remember that the factors that allowed this to happen are the same factors which are responsible for the extraordinarily high crime rate. We don't even know that it's some of these guns and ammunition are being used in mass killings were looted. We know that a station at Umlazi was looted. The police won't admit it, but locals know that gangsters are using the guns they got from the police station. So there's no transparency either. I can't get answers to questions.
Yeah,
so,
very difficult.
I mean, we are, as I said, please remember that whether or not this could happen again, but we don't know if people, whoever orchestrated it, want it to happen again. But it impacts on protest action. It impacts on the crime that we are experiencing now.
Yeah, all right. We got to leave it there. I'm so sad to do that. But Mary, thank you. Thanks for talking to us. I think giving us really an understanding as to what has happened after those July 2021 attacks and the anarchy that we saw. And the reality is not much. And that is quite sad. That was Violence Monitor Mary de Haas discussing whether there's been any clarity on facts surrounding those July 2021 events.